Good evening. You're watching Asia in Review, and I'm your host, David Day. And with us this evening is an unusual gentleman that is in the wrong chair. This is Bill Sharp. And Bill, it's nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Normally, Bill is sitting here if you've watched many of our Think Tech productions, but one of the things that we have as an asset with Think Tech is we have some hosts with enormous depth and expertise. And one area of expertise that Bill Sharp is very well known for in the region is his knowledge and background on Taiwan. And so our program this evening is called The Taiwan Success Story. And we hope that you learn a lot about this magnificent country and can take away some new education, some new learning about it, and we're very fortunate to have Bill Sharp sitting in the other chair. So,
thank you.
You know, this is going to be a fascinating discussion that we're going to have here, Bill, because we're going to start to take the gloves off a little bit. One of Think Tech's editorial mission statements is the emperor has no clothes. So we're going to start to take a real look at Taiwan and examine the backstory with a lot of issues that you may or may not have heard about. And that's one of the advantages Think Tech has, that the regular mass media, they cannot do that because they don't have this kind of expertise or depth in their journalistic corral, so to speak. So let's turn now to kind of a historic evolution of Taiwan, Bill, and its relationship with China, and what do you want our viewers to know about the Japanese colonial era? Let's kind of start there.
Okay, well, I think maybe we should just mention one thing before that, is historically the relationship between Taiwan and China has been very, very loose. And Taiwan has almost been considered sort of an outlier, or something we really don't want to think about unless we really have to, meaning those that were in power in Beijing. But
this is over what period of time?
This is up until at least the Sino-Japanese War of 1895. And since Japan was the victor in that war, as part of the settlement of that, Taiwan was ceded to Japan and became a Japanese colony, and remained so until 1945, the end of World War II.
Okay, so let's just take this and just go back 1 second here, because I think it's important for our listeners to appreciate that if you take the time when General MacArthur is on the fantail of the Missouri, not the fantail, but they're signing the surrender papers.
The surrender deck, yeah.
Okay, the surrender deck. And if you go back in time, how far back do you go till you get Taiwan as part of China?
Well, some people would say the connection never really firmly existed, that it was a tenuous connection at best. I mean, that's the view of some. Others would say it was closer than that. But I think, assessing everything, the relationship has been historically pretty loose.
Okay, so now let's jump into this period of from the Sino-Japanese War up through the surrender deck on the Missouri.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
What should our listener know about that period of Japanese colonialism, its impact on Taiwan?
Well, it's quite interesting, because if you compare the nature of Japanese colonialism in Korea as compared to the nature of Japanese colonialism in Taiwan, it's distinctly different.
Well, how so?
Well, the Japanese had a hard time in Korea. The Koreans really didn't take well to Japanese colonialism.
Well, that may have something to do with the way they treated the Koreans.
I think you're right there. And people would say that, generally speaking, they tried to decimate Korean culture. Whereas their approach in Taiwan was distinctly different, and it was much more ingratiating. And people accepted the Japanese colonial government. I mean, not completely, but I mean, for a colonial government, it was pretty well accepted. It was generally thought that the infrastructure laid down in Taiwan by the Japanese colonial authorities was quite significant, and sort of gave Taiwan a sort of a head start on economic development that a lot of other countries in Asia did not benefit from.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that that long period of Japanese colonial history was actually that the Japanese colonialism was actually a positive for Taiwan?
I think it probably was, in actuality. If you see a lot of the ports in Taiwan, even today, they were created by the Japanese. Railroad system, educational facilities, medical facilities, they were considered pretty advanced for the time, especially in a colonial context.
Interesting. They are interesting. Let's do the great leap forward now, if we
Okay.
can, and let's talk about as we move from the Japanese colonial era into the Republic of China. How does that transition take place?
Tumultuously. At the end of World War II, of course, the nationalist Chinese, Republic of China, was an ally of the United States, an allied power. It was a victor. And so Taiwan was restored to the Republic of China. However, the Republic of China was really, I don't think, well ready for that. It was too concerned with the ongoing Chinese Civil War. And their treatment and rule in Taiwan was heavy-handed and ineffective. It caused lots of uprising, strife, etc. This ended in a very big demonstration, the Chinese call Ba, the February 28th incident, where a number of protesters in Taiwan were killed. Ultimately, the military in general in charge of Taiwan at that time was executed by Chiang Kai-shek for his, how should we say, ineffective way of handling with the situation. And if you, right across from the president's office in Taiwan today, you see a big plaque, a big memorial commemorating that event. And down the street, there's a park called the 228, the Ba Park, which also commemorates that event.
Bill, you in this discussion over the last few minutes, you use the word in the sentence that the Republic of China was restored.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, the Republic of China, of course, was created in 1911. Well, technically 1912. Okay, and it's the first republic in Asia. So it has to be given credit for helping to set Asia on a path of democratic development. Although its task was very hard, since China at that time was effectively semi-colonized.
Okay.
It had a lot of internal strife. The country was divided into regional areas, each under the control of a different warlord. Chiang Kai-shek's perhaps grandest moment in history was fighting off those warlords and trying to create some sort of semblance of unity to all of China. But then what happens? The Japanese invade China.
Okay, but the island of Taiwan,
Mm-hmm.
prior to General MacArthur's ink on the paper,
Mm-hmm. Ink on the paper.
on the surrender deck, the island of Taiwan, was it ever part of the Republic of China?
No, it was not.
Okay.
Because the war, the Sino-Japanese War of 1895 was over. China had already relinquished Taiwan to Japan. Okay. 1911 comes in. At that time, Taiwan's under Japanese control.
I got you. Okay, so when was the 100th anniversary of the Republic of China? That
Just
was,
this year.
okay,
Just
and
this
what's
year.
the significance of that?
Well, the significance is that this was, in Chinese history, is very significant in that it essentially ends the dynastic era of Chinese history. And it creates perhaps an imperfect but a republican form of government in China. It seeks to put China
Wait a minute, a Republican form of government in China?
in China, right?
Or in Taiwan?
Well, when it was created, it was in China.
I understand. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So then it's moved to Taiwan, and so I got you.
In 1945, when Taiwan was given back to the Republic of China, then the power of the Republic was extended to Taiwan.
I see. Okay. Okay. So now we have the Republic of China on the island of Taiwan,
Right?
and let's look at the topic of political values now.
Sure.
And what's the relationship between the political values in contemporary Taiwan with American political values? I mean, how do you see those two?
Well, let me sort of back up a little bit on that answer, maybe add a question to your question. I think of, it's often people say, well, Taiwan is very Americanized. And I suspect in political terms it is. But if you look at a lot of the structure of Taiwan society, the structure of Taiwan government, the way people do things, I think you still see a very deep Japanese influence.
Interesting.
Yeah, very
Interesting.
deep. And
Can you give us an example?
well, the way people interact with each other, the way they conduct themselves, the sort of level of politeness, especially with older Japanese, Taiwanese, you see so much Japanese-like body language. And although that older generation is maybe fading away, still a lot of them, they would say their native language is Japanese. Lee Dong-wei, former president of Taiwan, he's very much like that. The head of the Straits Exchange Foundation, I had the opportunity to meet a year and a half ago, a very impressive person. At times I thought I was talking to a Japanese person. Prevalence of Japanese-style entertainment, Japanese foods, it's clearly there. You know, Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong, maybe they didn't agree on very much.
Right.
But there was some fear they had after World War II. It's like, well, you know, these are Taiwanese. They're just maybe a little too Japanese. You know, we're a little leery of this.
Interesting. I bet you, as a viewer, you didn't know this. You know, it's kind of interesting. So let's go back to American political values. Now,
Well,
what do
I
you see?
think that, you know, if you look at the government of Taiwan, if you look at the people in the parliament, such a high percentage have studied in the United States or some other Western country or Japan. And they bring a lot of those values back to Taiwan, and they're clearly in play. It was 5 years ago, I was in Taiwan. This was at the time of the so-called Million Man March. This is when it became clear that then President Chen Shui-bian was corrupt. And this huge movement throughout Taiwan, just not in Taipei, but in every major city, sought to force him out of office. And I remember, you know, they have lots of concerts and stuff. At the concerts where they're playing all American music. And it just sort of underlines the fact that so much of this thought has American roots.
Okay, so let's go from that now to how would you characterize the nature of the democracy that we would see in Taiwan?
Oh, I think it's very impressive. When I was a student in Taiwan in the 70s, it was an authoritarian government. It was a dictatorship. People were scared of the police. The military police had unbridled powers in civil society. There were political prisoners in several locations throughout Taiwan. There was a sort of legislature on paper, which was a lot of old men that came from mainland China to Taiwan and stayed there because they had a cushy deal. I mean, that's all changed. There were elections. There were elections in the past, but they were very sort of controlled, right? I think you see a very vibrant society, and I would argue that in Asia, you see in Taiwan the most viable, solid, stable, two-party democracy of any place in Asia.
Well, how would you compare the two-party democracy in Taiwan with what we would see in South Korea, for instance? What's the difference?
I'm going to get in trouble with my South Korean friends here, but
But you know, the emperor has no clothes. Just tell it straight. You know, tell it. The viewers are there. They're waiting.
Right. I think that South Korea and Taiwan share an awful lot of similarities. Their backgrounds, our histories are very similar. They've gone through a lot of the same experiences, moving from authoritarianism to democracy, from poverty to wealth. But it does seem in South Korea the party system is very unstable, and that it's very fluid. Fluid is a better word. It is very fluid. And now you have the Grand National Alliance in power, okay? But other parties just about don't exist. Before the Grand National Alliance came back into power, it was, you know, essentially not a significant factor. It had receded, totally removed itself from public view. So you have this fluidity in Korea where parties come on
Okay.
and then others disappear. There's no sort of constant, ongoing stability.
Well, Bert, how about contrast that with the democracy that we see in Japan, for instance?
And here my Japanese friends would probably, and Japanese
the
specialists I know would
The
probably
emperor
not
has no clothes.
appreciate this
Just tell
comment.
Just tell it straight.
But I think Japan is essentially a system where there are two half parties. The Liberal Democratic
Half
Party,
parties?
yeah, which got removed from office a few years ago after running Japan for 50 years and doesn't really seem to have made much of a change and seems to lack direction.
Okay.
And then you have the Democratic Party of Japan, which is the ruling party of Japan, but it's very bifurcated, it's very factionalized. You have such a wide assortment of interests represented within that party, it lacks effectiveness. That's why I say in Japan you essentially have a two half-party system.
Okay. How about just a comment or two, just for contrast, about another democracy that's coming
Sure.
on is Indonesia. Compared with Taiwan? What would you
Okay,
say?
well, I'm not as familiar with Indonesia as I am with Korea and Japan, but it does seem that, Indonesia has some parallels with Taiwan. There was definitely a long period of dictatorship. It does seem that the Indonesian experience is somewhat younger than Taiwan's.
Sure.
A lot of people suggest that Indonesia is a model of the future. And I guess everybody is going to want to keep their eyes on it.
Okay, so the kind of the bottom line, the takeaway on this concept of democracy is that, in your view, if I understand what you're saying, is that one of the enormous successes of Taiwan is that they have built a vibrant, successful, ongoing two-party system deeply ingrained in American political values.
That's my view. That is definitely my view. And we should probably give credit where credit is due. A lot of this could not have come about without the assistance of Jiang Jingguo, the son of Chiang Kai-shek, who at one time, his reputation was just about as, how should we say, as authoritarian as his father's. But he realized that in the future, if Taiwan is to succeed and do well in the world, it's got to make some pretty major changes. And with his influence, and later with the advent to power of President Lee Dong-hui, Taiwan democracy would significantly move forward.
So, Bill, what you've described here in the last few minutes is an island off the coast of China where the flag of democracy has been firmly planted.
Yes.
And what does that do, that fact of life, what does that do for or how does that impact, I guess is a better word, the moral and maybe legal obligations that we as Americans or as the U.S. government might have vis-a-vis Taiwan? I mean, how do you see this?
Well, America is a country that stands for democracy, it stands for human rights. And we hold that to be very dear to us. It's depending on the administration. Regardless of administration, it's fairly central to American foreign policy. And it seems that given the commonality and political perspective that Taiwan and the United States share, that common interest should bind us ever closer together.
And what's I've heard people say that, well, I'm not so sure that Taiwan really is that strategic. It's not that important. I mean, that's kind of the tone we often hear coming out of some of our diplomats, our leaders in Washington. What's the real truth in terms of Taiwan's strategic position?
In my view, Taiwan is of significant strategic interest to the United States.
Why is that?
Well, we should probably have a map here, but if we just sort of focus on Taiwan, we look to the north, we see the Yellow Sea, the Bohai Gulf. We look to the south, we see the South China Sea, and Taiwan is right in the middle of that. So if there is to be a solution to the South China Sea situation, being friendly with Taiwan, being on good terms with Taiwan, is definitely a strategic interest to the United States. Now, as you know, and I think a lot of our listeners do, this whole area of the South China Sea is extremely strategic because through it passes so much shipping carrying both regular goods as well as natural resources, oil from the Middle East, etc., that it's vital to the survival of Northeast Asia. If Taiwan should come under the control of mainland China, it would always have the potential to sever that connection between Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, and it would allow China to jut its military power out into the Western Pacific.
In addition to interrupting that huge flow
Right.
of goods through the Straits of Malacca and the
Right.
South China Sea.
Right, and I can also tell you the Japanese are extremely worried about the future of Taiwan. When I was in Taiwan a few weeks ago, there was a visiting delegation from the Japanese Parliament of 70 members, and I had opportunity to speak to several of them. And without exception, they registered extreme concern about Taiwan's future, because if you see Taiwan on the map, you know that it's very, very close to Japan's southernmost prefecture,
that's right.
Okinawa Prefecture.
It's almost a short swim.
It's almost a short swim. And on the other hand, if you look at the very southern tip of Taiwan, it's just across the channel from the northern beaches of Luzon in the Philippines. And I think it's fair to say the Philippines would not exactly welcome the Chinese naval patrols in that channel.
What is the connection strategically with the Yellow Sea that Taiwan has, that this area called the Bohai Gulf?
The Bohai Gulf. Well, the Bohai Gulf is sandwiched in between the western shores of Korea and the eastern shores of China, northeast China. And China has made it known in the last couple of years that it has a vital strategic interest in the control of the Bohai Gulf, the Yellow Sea, and that extends down through the Taiwan Straits into the South China Sea.
I see.
Some people would say that China's ultimate goal is to make that area a Chinese lake. Given the Chinese military buildup, which is carried out both by naval vessels as well as so-called civilian fisheries ministry vessels, which might be something like our Coast Guard or the National Oceanographic Administration, there are plenty of Chinese ships in that area.
So the U.S. strategic obligations to defend both Philippines and Japan. Let's set aside the obligations for Taiwan. Well, before we do that, I'm going to hold my hands here. We'll come back to that. What are the U.S. Strategic obligations by way of treaties to defend Taiwan?
Well, the United States had a mutual defense treaty with Taiwan between 1954 and 1979. That treaty was first created as mainland China tried to attack, or not tried, was attacking the offshore islands. The offshore islands are two island groups under the control of Taiwan, but are just directly across from mainland China, separated only by like a mile or two. And as a result of that, the United States crafted and signed the Mutual Security Treaty, which I think was very, very cleverly written, and said that, well, that in the event of a mainland attack on Taiwan, that the United States reserved the right to come to the defense of Taiwan.
Is that treaty still in effect today?
No. That, at the time, the United States broke relations with Taiwan and established official relations with the People's Republic of China, mainland China. That was abrogated. And then the Taiwan Relations Act came in. The Taiwan Relations Act reflected a lot of the same language of the Mutual Security Treaty.
So let's cut through all this.
Sure.
Is there something like a mutual defense requirement that the United States currently has with Taiwan?
It's written I think in a very, as I mentioned earlier, clever way. It says that, if another force should attack Taiwan, meaning mainland China, then the United States could come to the assistance of Taiwan. Now, why is it written that way? Back when the Mutual Security Treaty was written, there was this fear, I think fear is the best word, that Chiang Kai-shek wanted to go back to the mainland, and if he had to drag America into it, he would do it. So the United States wanted some brakes on him. They didn't want to give him sort of some sort of tool that he might turn into some sort of carte blanche endorsement.
So what you're saying is the United States is not locked into a defense situation with Taiwan, but it has its options.
Right. When Chan Shui-bian was president of Taiwan, he enjoyed taunting mainland China, and he, it seems to me, felt that no matter what he did, the United States would come to his aid. But in reality, you know, if Taiwan should unnecessarily taunt mainland China and provoke a situation, the United States might decide, well, you know, that's your guys' problem.
Okay. Okay.
Which I think is fair, and it acts as a brake on people who might get a little carried away.
All right, so now we have a situation where we go back to my two hands here.
Sure.
I got them reversed. So let's say
Okay,
this
okay.
is the U.S. Obligations of the United States to defend Japan, and an obligation that the United States has to defend the Philippines.
Right.
And so, having given us the background on the U.S. defense obligations vis-a-vis Taiwan, what happens now in the event that Taiwan is absorbed by mainland China in those two defense obligations that the U.S. currently has? What happens then?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. If Taiwan should somehow unite with mainland China, how, if I understand your question
Correct.
correctly, how would that impact the defense obligations the United States has to both Japan and to the Philippines? It's going to make it a lot more difficult, and which I think is another way of underlining the strategic importance of Taiwan to the U.S.
What's the connection, one last time now, just to make sure our viewers get this, what's the connection between if we look on a map and we focus in on Singapore at the tip of the Malay Peninsula,
Right.
we have between Malaysia, the Straits of Malacca.
Right.
What's the connection between the strategic position of Taiwan and the Straits of Malacca?
Well, oil comes from the Middle East through the Indian Ocean, through the Malacca Straits, and then it turns north to go through the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait to Japanese ports, Korean ports, and I suppose we should include Taiwan ports and Filipino ports.
So essentially, the strategic position that Taiwan holds for the South China Sea is actually the gate or the door to the entrance or exit, depending on which way that you're going.
Exactly. And if that sea route was denied to vessels, then they would have to swing way outside and go north, and that would be fairly impractical.
Interesting, very interesting. Let's talk next, but also in the realm of strategic positioning that Taiwan has. I want to talk a little bit about, because this is a Think Tech production. By the way, you're watching Asia in Review here with Think Tech, and we're talking about the Taiwan success story, and we've got as our guest one of Think Tech's own in-house experts. Normally, Bill Sharp is sitting where I'm sitting, but we forced him to sit over there today because we want to kind of underscore some of the expertise that we do have here at Think Tech. And Bill is an expert on Taiwan, as if you've been listening, you can tell. But let's talk about the strategic positioning, because Think Tech is about tech.
Right.
So let's talk about the strategic positioning that Taiwan has, having to do with the whole field, the global field of computers and computer parts. Where does Taiwan fit in that area?
Well, as Armitage International, a consulting firm headed up by Dick Armitage, who was Deputy Secretary of State during the Bush administration, they wrote a very, very interesting report, I think it was 3 years ago now, and saying that, Taiwan is really pretty vital to the greater world, because so many computer parts, computer peripherals, etc., come out of Taiwan. It plays a very key role in the international supply chain of computer parts. If that were denied, say the United States and other countries, it could have a significant impact.
It's interesting because there's if we look at the geographic position of Taiwan, they're kind of a gatekeeper, or are a gatekeeper for the South China Sea.
Right.
And for the tech industry, they are a similar gatekeeper in the supply chain.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I hope you're learning something from this, because this is really some interesting detail and background about Taiwan and its success that you as the viewer probably don't know, and I'm learning here, Bill. So it's wonderful to have you here. Let's look at kind of a slightly different topic
Sure.
here. Let's talk about Taiwan's accomplishments the things that it has done to build the modern China that we see. And by modern China, I'm talking about the People's Republic of China,
Okay.
the mainland. Okay, so what is it? What has it done to assist in the rise of the China that we now know?
Now, you're talking about the rise of Taiwan itself, or
No,
the
I'm
rise
talking
of
about the rise
mainland
of
China?
mainland China.
Well, first of all, it's Taiwan's economic development, starting in the early 50s, essentially was kicked off by a very effective land reform. And land reform, I think, has been so crucial to the development of Asian countries that we consider rich today, be it Japan, Korea, or Taiwan. Okay? And with that land reform came increased agricultural production, which allowed Taiwan to export agricultural goods for hard cash, hard currency. And then also the folks whose land was purchased by the government with the assistance of the U.S., they were able to invest in industry. So you had a strong agricultural track as well as a strong industrial track going. And in this industrial track, Japan, Taiwan bought into what we might call the East Asian economic model, which was export, export, export. And it crafted these very, they're kind of old-fashioned now, I suppose, but in a time when they first started, they were considered very novel, import-export processing zones. Their first one was in Kaohsiung in southern Taiwan. That model has been followed by, I don't think China wants to admit it, it's been followed by China. So if you look at like Shenzhen, which is right across the border from Hong Kong, and if you look at some of the other import-export processing zones up the coast of China, they're all pretty much derived from that Kaohsiung model.
Okay, so let me freeze you right there. You're
Sure.
talking about the building of the wealth model, the
Right.
economic model that builds Taiwan's wallet.
Right, okay,
All right?
there you
All right.
go.
And so during that period in time, if you and I were sitting on the island of Taiwan and we're looking across the straits there, what's the economic condition in mainland China?
Not good.
Not good.
After liberation in 1949, China had a land reform, okay? It gave peasants their own land. However, this land reform was not successful. And it's generally said the reason it wasn't is the peasants that got land, they understood everything there was about farming, when to plant this and when to harvest this, but they didn't understand the business aspects of agriculture. They didn't understand credit and credit management and how to deal with banks and cooperatives. And so instead of increasing agricultural production, which land reform is supposed to do, land reform ended up in production decreasing. Then along comes the Cultural Revolution, and we know that that's when Mao Zedong started collectives. And
So we're about what time frame?
well,
roughly?
generally we're talking 1966 here,
Okay,
at the
so
beginning of
start
the Cultural Revolution.
66, all right.
And while Taiwan is moving ahead with successful land reform, industrialization, China is trying to create the new socialist man, organizing people into, collectives.
But so the picture is economically, Taiwan is building itself up,
Right.
building its wallet, and China is actually kind of moving backwards.
Kind
a
of
bit.
moving backwards. Mao Zedong, it said that, there's all kinds of theories about Mao Zedong, and they said, yeah, he was interested in economic development later. His first goal was to create the new Chinese man, remold people's way of thinking, get rid of the weaknesses in Chinese character, build a new man. And once he did that, then it is said, that he would be concerned about economic development.
Okay, so let's go forward now. Where's the end of the Cultural Revolution? Is what
Well,
year?
it depends on who you talk to, but I think we can safely say 1976.
Okay, so in 1976, then there's the turmoil in leadership that China undergoes. If we
Right.
were to stop now and look back at Taiwan in 1976, what are we looking at in terms of an economy?
Well, at this time, Taiwan is really beginning to make its grand entry onto the global export stage. And import-export processing zones are moving along. They're attracting lots of foreign investment.
Big in shipbuilding, they're doing industrial
shipbuilding,
development.
steel, plastics, a little bit of everything, really.
So they're continuing to rise.
They're continuing to rise.
All right, so then China goes through this turmoil following the death of Mao, which
Right.
is brings us to the if we move through a couple leaders, we get to the era in the 1980s, sometime of Deng Xiaoping.
Right.
And one of his philosophical economic models was something like let a thousand flowers bloom.
Well, no, that was an idea that Mao had, which turned out to be pretty much of a disaster.
Okay.
But Deng Xiaoping brought in the four modernizations.
Okay.
Modernization in agriculture, science, technology, and military affairs. And essentially to adapt aspects of capitalism into the Chinese model.
So what year are we talking about?
Well, this is generally, usually people in mainland China, they use this term kaifang, which means China open to the
Right,
world
okay, so
in
that's-
1978.
So we're right at the tail end of the Cultural Revolution, we're moving into this new era.
Right.
And the Chinese economy on the mainland is been decimated.
Decimated.
And so we've got a very successful Taiwan in terms of its economic development. And so let's turn now to what, from that vantage point, what does Taiwan do to assist in the development of the modern contemporary China that we know now?
Well, in those days, there were really no investments, Taiwan investments in mainland China. Taiwan's economy is pretty much focused on Taiwan. There was very little contact between the mainland and China at that time. Occasionally, you would read things in the newspaper, though. There was this meeting between a delegation from Taiwan and the mainland in Hong Kong or Singapore. It didn't seem to really, make much traction. So Taiwan's contributions to mainland development were pretty insignificant. Probably.
When do they become significant?
Well, yeah, that's kind of hard to nail down, but let's say clearly when Li Dongwei was president, he succeeded Jiang Jingguo. Jiang Jingguo died when it was 1989. And investments began to go to China. Li Dongwei himself was not too happy about that because he thought it would create a connection between Taiwan and the mainland that might get out of control.
So we're talking about 1990.
Yeah,
forward.
very late 80s, early 1990s, yeah.
Okay.
And that his policy was go slow. He tried to persuade Taiwan companies, why don't you invest in Vietnam? Why don't you invest in Southeast Asia? And if you really
But that isn't what happened, is it?
well, no, it did happen, but
not-
also the mainland investment stream picked up.
Okay, so what do we got in this? Describe for our viewers now, if we fast forward the DVD or the videotape till we get up that period from 1990 up until now, what has Taiwan done by way of assisting to build the so-called economic juggernaut of China? What have they done?
Well, there's huge Taiwan investments in the mainland. Taiwan's investments in the mainland are bigger than any other places. There's 1 million Taiwanese living in China.
I mean, bigger than other places where it's invested in the world, or is Taiwan the largest investor?
Taiwan's the largest external investor in China,
Larger than Hong Kong?
larger than Hong Kong.
Wow.
And of course, there are many Taiwan factories in China. There's been a kind of a hollowing out of Taiwan. On the other hand, the downside of this is as labor became more expensive in Taiwan.
You then have the outsourcing push.
Right. You have, and people look across the Taiwan Straits and they see cheap labor in China, abundant cheap labor. It's very attractive.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And so there are, quite a, I don't know how many, but a lot of Taiwan factories in China producing all kinds of stuff and taking advantage of that cheap labor. Taiwan's has a challenge before it right now, but it's a challenge a lot of other Asian countries have. Japan, South Korea is, okay, we can't survive on cheap labor anymore, but can we really move up the creative ladder?
The value chain,
The
push it.
value chain.
Right, okay.
Can we create these creative products that yield high profits? And that's a challenge for East Asia. I think, it's tempting to say that, East Asia is like a new center of the world, and in some ways it is, but it's got significant weaknesses too. And coming up with this new model, just not one that's predicated on cheap labor, is one of the hugest challenges it faces.
Bill, if I hear you correctly, what you're telling our viewers is that no matter how you slice and dice it, that the success that contemporary China enjoys today, well, I'm talking about People's Republic of China,
Right.
that in large part that is due to seed money investment that has come in from the island of Taiwan.
Well, it's hard to put exact percentage on that. I think it's probably fair to say that China has studied a lot of other economies around the world. It's particularly studied South Korea, it's studied Japan, and of course the United States and Western European countries, and it's sort of tried to take ideas from wherever they thought might be useful. I forget the exact number, 50,000 students from the People's Republic of China studying in U.S. universities and in a number of other countries, and all sort of contributing to what's going on. But I think it's fair to say that Taiwan has made a significant contribution to China's development.
In that 30-year period from 1990 up until the present time.
And perhaps even shorter period in actuality.
Okay. Let's take now we're kind of worked our way up to the present time for a moment here in our discussion. What I'd like you to do is how about compare the accomplishments of Taiwan compared with mainland China? Their accomplishments in a number of different areas. Just real quickly here so we can. What about in the area of health?
Well, I'm really impressed by the health services in Taiwan. I mean, unfortunately, I tend to get sick when I travel, so I've had the
Welcome to the club.
I've had the opportunity to have firsthand experience with
Okay.
Taiwan medical facilities, and they're really pretty impressive and very reasonable. There's the National Health Plan. The United States could probably learn something from that,
Okay.
which covers health services, pharmaceuticals, etc. The government now has a national retirement plan. Maybe Social Security could learn something from that.
You had any experience with medical facilities in mainland China?
Yes, I have, and I really can't complain. One of the first times I went to China, I had a dreadful case of the flu, bronchitis, acute bronchitis at that, and I was very well cared for. There's no doubt about it.
How about Taiwan's accomplishments in the field of education?
I think that they're very impressive. One thing, the Republic of China government, when they went to Taiwan, it realized, and the United States made sure they understood it, you guys didn't do very well on the mainland, so if you really want to stick around, you're going to have to do some things differently. And they made a kind of a deal with the people of Taiwan. Yes, we will invest a huge amount of the national budget in education. Asians, this, are so big on education.
Sure.
It's one of the great
Yeah.
things I really admire about East Asia. And every little town in Taiwan has a school. I spent the last couple of weeks in Taiwan actually traveling a lot in the countryside, and even in places, small little towns, nowhere, big school. Wow. Significant investment.
I mean, we see here in Hawaii all kinds of students from Taiwan and at the University of Hawaii,
Right.
at HPU. It's very impressive, and they're great students.
And Taiwan probably has more universities than it really needs. I guess it was in the 90s, there was this big push for more positions in universities, so they opened universities that they probably shouldn't have. And now they're having trouble filling them all. In fact, they're trying to bring some students from the mainland to Taiwan to have a student population.
What about accomplishments in standard of living?
I think they're quite high and quite comfortable. And I remember, in the 70s in Taiwan as a student, well, it was better than some other places in Asia, but still a little on the rustic side. It's very, very comfortable.
What's your take on the judicial system?
I have a, well,
This is unusual because we have a lawyer asking a non-lawyer this question.
Right,
but
right, right.
He's the expert. He knows better than I do, that's for sure.
I think, if we look at mainland China, I think most people would say that law in mainland China is kind of this, it's not very unified. The law is what the chief of police in this town says it is, regardless of what anybody else says, regardless of what's written on the books. And the administration of justice is pretty uneven. The courts are ultimately controlled by the party. Now, I would say, well, every country's legal system has some problem. But as I see the Taiwan system, it's pretty good. And it's not to say that there's not some reform that should take place. There are some laws left over from the bad old days of Taiwan that should be taken off the books and have yet to be taken off. And those laws, unfortunately, are reflective of 1930s era type thinking.
Can you tell us anything about it? What is a foreigner that gets involved with a legal problem in Taiwan, they get in the Taiwanese courts. Mm-hmm. What's your impression? Can a foreigner get a fair shake in Taiwan?
I don't really have any relevant experience in this. I believe they can, but I probably should just say I don't have any relevant experience myself.
What about accomplishments of Taiwan in something like the concept of civil society? Where do you see them?
Oh, it's so impressive. The press is so free. You can turn on Taiwan television and listen to talk shows all day long with such a wide variety of opinions, a wide variety of newspapers. There's no controls over movies or anything like that. There's no, like, in mainland China, movies have to be approved by censors, right, before they can be made public. If your newspaper...
Well, that's a huge difference right there.
Oh, and Taiwan used to be like that. It used to be the Government Information Office was kind of the bad guys, right? Well, their mission's completely different. I think it's a very vibrant society. I see a lot of volunteerism popping up, a lot of nonprofit organizations.
Really?
And for countries in Asia, such as Burma, who want to seemingly walk down the path of democracy, Taiwan's got a lot of organizations that can help them because they went through that authoritarianism. And the people that went through it are still very much alive, very active, and very focused on that.
Bill, as I listen to you talk about the phenomenal accomplishments of this island country, I can't help but thinking that they have done things and accomplished things that gotta be the envy of many countries in the world.
There are a lot of countries in the world that would like to be as good as Taiwan. If you look across Africa, lots of places in Southeast Asia, places in South America, if they could achieve what Taiwan has achieved, they would be very happy.
Let's you've talked about the strategic position of Taiwan. Mm-hmm. You've given us some historical context, and we look now looked at some of the accomplishments, and I guess I just gotta ask you,
Sure.
Where do you think the U.S. is going to be vis-a-vis Taiwan? Are they going to cut and run, or
Well,
what do you think?
I certainly hope not, because if the U.S. wants to maintain a viable position in East Asia, such as Secretary of State Clinton says it wants to, and other high-level officials in the U.S. government, I don't think they can, as you say, cut and run. To do so would have a negative impact on the U.S. position in East Asia, and I think that would ripple across the world. The United States has been very close with the Republic of China for a very long time. And other countries in East Asia, while in one sense they're worried about offending China, and they're playing a little bit of a hands-off game with Taiwan, they also have their eyes very glued on Taiwan, seeing how the U.S. is approaching it. So the United States has to be extremely cautious in how it deals with Taiwan. I sometimes, maybe I'm going a little bit beyond your question here a bit, some of the thinking that sometimes comes out of Washington disturbs me from time to time. There's this sort of feeling...
The sacrificial lamb concept?
The sacrificial lamb. Well, we'll just back off on Taiwan, and then we'll have this wonderful relationship with China. And to me, that seems fairly naive. I mean, if I just sit here and think today, what help has China been with currency problems? What help has China been with climate problems? What help has China been with Iran?
Well, the news today was that during the revolution, when the foreign telecommunications firms were shut down in Iran, that Chinese firms moved in and took over. You
I
know,
hadn't heard that, but in a way, it
it's-
doesn't surprise me.
It's not that they didn't help, that there may be some evidence that they were on the other side. The same is true with the situation possibly in Libya.
I've heard that too, that the Chinese offered to sell Gaddafi weapons on at least a couple of occasions.
And what about North Korea? I mean, how do you see China's?
Well, that's a very delicate situation for China, and China is, for lack of a better word, freaked out about the possibility of North Korea collapsing.
Well, they ought to be.
Yeah, because that would put a lot of economic pressure on China. At the same time, China's roots, claws, if you want to say it that way, are getting deeper and deeper into North Korea. They are also freaked out about the possibility of a united Korea, united under Seoul, with the possibility of U.S. troops right on the Chinese border.
Right there on the Yalu River.
Right. And because of those two fears, they're willing to sort of put up with a lot. I don't think the North Koreans particularly like the Chinese. I think in some ways they look for ways to distance themselves from the Chinese, but not many people want to warm up to the North Koreans.
You know, Bill, on this topic of North Korea, let me kind of go down a slightly different rabbit
Sure.
trail for a second here. Is there anything, I realize that Taiwan is not part of the six-party talks, but do you know of any involvement by Taiwan in attempting to assist with the situation in North Korea?
Well, I don't know of any sort of role that Taiwan has tried to play in any of the six-party issues. I do know that at least in the not that distant past, there were some Taiwan businessmen who ventured to North Korea looking for business opportunities, but realized that there's probably not much there to interest them.
What's there to this notion that, you know, we've kind of seen this kind of unending military buildup on the China side of the Taiwan Strait? I mean, how do you see this in terms of the general sacrificial lamb attitude that we sometimes hear out of Washington?
I think
In other words, that Taiwan should be the sacrificial lamb for a closer relationship
Right.
with China, and yet we see this unending military buildup that on the Chinese side of the strait facing Taiwan.
I think, you know, there's some people in Washington that feel like, well, if we distance ourselves somewhat from Taiwan, that we can have this wonderful relationship with China. The military relationship will be improved. But I find that hard to believe. As I see Chinese delegations come to the United States, they simply seek to use their time here to weaken the Taiwan Relations Act. In my view, China seems to be buying time to the point where it feels it's in a position where it can successfully challenge the United States without question.
So you're saying that there's a buying time aspect
To me,
that's
there
going
is,
on?
yeah. And it seems to me, has China removed, the Chinese were so worried about the U.S. selling F-16Cs and Ds to Taiwan. Yet, well, you know, if you would remove some of your missiles, destroy them, maybe that wouldn't have been the issue that it was. Yet you have, you know, more and more military activity focused on the Taiwan Straits. And to me, the United States arms deal to Taiwan was not as significant as it could be. I think that the Taiwan Air Force, some people would say the upgrades to the F-16s, As and Bs was significant. It's a help. But to really make those aircraft as good as some people say they would be, it requires new engines. And the Taiwan Air Force has a number of jets that should be literally put into a scrap pile and should be replaced by the Cs and Ds. The defense of Taiwan depends a lot on sea defense and air defense. And air defense is right now, Taiwan which not that long ago had air superiority in Taiwan Strait, simply doesn't have it today.
Bill, we're almost out of time here, and I'd like you to maybe jump into a different topic
Sure.
slightly here to kind of wind out this discussion here. What's happening with elections coming up in 2012 in Taiwan? What do you see happening?
This is going to be a really interesting election. This is going to be, it's so close, and there's so much excitement being generated that we just have to stay tuned. The candidates are campaigning hard. Their campaigns are clever.
So we've got President Ma on one side with
Right.
his party. What is his party called?
His party is called the Nationalist Party, or some people just call it the KMT.
Okay, and the KMT, they're responsible for maybe rebuilding relationship with China a little
Right.
closer. And
That's been his claim to fame in his
okay,
term.
and who have we got on the other side?
On the other side, we have the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party. Now, in the past, these were considered the people of Taiwan independence, but I think that, how should I say, they've moved away from that line. They want relations with mainland China, but they don't want them to be quite as torrid as the nationalists believe they should be. They see the economic benefits, but essentially they want a more, how should I say, a more balanced policy. I think the leader of the DPP, Tsai Ing-wen, is a pretty reasonable person. Some people try to tar her as a Taiwan independence advocate. I don't really think she is. She understands trade, she understands economic benefits. And then there's a middle person, which adds a very interesting element, James Song. Some people might call him a
So
spoiler.
there are three candidates?
There are three candidates. It's going to be a very interesting election. If you believe in democratic elections and you enjoy the excitement of democratic elections, watch the Taiwan election.
What, any predictions on your part?
I think most people will say, analysts that I've talked to in Taiwan, Taiwan watchers in China, Americans that follow this, like me, tend to think Ma will win, but it's going to be very close. And as a result of that, his second term, his power will be significantly reduced. His party will also lose seats in parliament. They will not lose a majority, but they won't have the absolute sway that they have now.
You know, Bill, this has been a fascinating discussion, and I know I've learned a lot, and I hope you as the viewer have learned a lot. You've been watching Asia in Review here, and we hope you have enjoyed this program, and we'll be back with you again.